suspension bridge built across a stream in the forest. Cop cars on fire. A clipboard painted green with the words, "Let the people decide." A friendly but unexpected knock at the door, inviting you to a town hall on Thursday. An open mic night at a local church, an excavator destroyed, a line of people hundreds long winding down the marble staircase in the atrium of City Hall, a fleet of police motorcycles going up in flames, a potted fern you can have for free if you'd like, a child at a rally turning shyly to her mother for the go-ahead to speak as she raises a megaphone. Surveillance cameras smashed. One of the largest urban forests in North America at a stake in a battle between a broad coalition of everyday people and the big money and guns that run the city of Atlanta. These are scenes from the Stop Cop City movement, a decentralized effort to stop the construction of a $120 million police militarization facility and the devastation of the Weelaunee forest. In this book, you'll find many scenes like these, as well as lessons for future battles against conjoined threats of police militarism, environmental collapse, and the rule of the rich.
You're now listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.
Welcome once again, listeners, to the Socialist Shelf. Hope y'all enjoyed your little break over the so-called Memorial Day weekend. Of course, we recognize it as Decoration Day before that. Go look that up.
Shout out to memorials for real, though. Forget me.
Yes. Before it was about U.S. empire, it was about emancipation of enslaved people. Go look on Liberation News for that. It's a really interesting read. This week we're doing a little more nonfiction for you. The book is No Cop City, No Cop World, and here to talk about it is one of the editors. Their name is Mariah Parker, activist by day, MC by night, activist all the time. How you doing, Mariah?
I'm great. How are y'all doing? It's so good to be here.
I'm fantastic.
Yeah, super excited. Just got finished reading this book. I've been excited for it for a minute, and super excited to have another author on to talk about some work that we're super excited about. It's also cool. We know each other personally as well. We've done organizing work. We've run into each other at these events. We've done that kind of stuff. I mean, the big event that's mentioned multiple times in this book, the 2023 City Hall commentary / almost occupation, was at that. I was the landing page image for the AJC and almost lost my job. That was awesome.
Yes.
Hold on.
Can we still find that video where you're like, 2020 was a rehearsal and you haven't seen us get really mean?
Yes, maybe. I don't know. But it's super exciting. This book is, not only is it like exciting to read, but it's also like a super important reflection on this movement, on this moment. So could you just tell us, for those who might not know, basically what is the Cop City situation here in Atlanta and what influenced you to write this book? What's the background on it?
Yeah. So
or to work on this book, I suppose. There are a lot of contributors.
Yeah. So Cop City was proposed and pushed through, starting with the uprising of 2020, with the police killed Rayshard Brooks at a Wendy's. Wendy's was burnt to the ground. The Atlanta Police Department saw a blue flu epidemic where effectively, the police department were going on strike to protest their treatment in the media, the fact they were being held accountable in this mass uprising. And so the city of Atlanta came forth with this plan to implement better training for officers, by which they mean militarization and exchange of tactics for warfare with the Israeli Defense Forces, by building this compound in what was once one of the largest urban forests in North America, to then also have other law enforcement agencies around the state, around the country, come and train there as well. So it's a $120 million Cop City. We call it Cop City because it actually contains a mock city block with a gas station, nightclub, apartments sports racetracks for them to practice putting down insurgencies, like the ones they faced in the summer of 2020. And so for 4 years, ever since Rayshard Brooks was killed, and we did not get justice for his murder by police officer Garrett Rolfe, people have organized against this facility, calling for investments in the things that people really need to thrive, that make our community safe, and to employing an array of tactics to stop this facility from getting built. And so the book is sort of like a showcase of the various ways people have engaged in this struggle, everything from organizing, parents and children, to piloting independent sources of media, to land occupation and sabotage, to base building, to a referendum effort, and all these different tactics that have been used to oppose Cop City. And so we hope that engaging with these various chapters, various slices of this very broad-ranging movement, people can pick out from it, what sorts of things apply to their own context, be they fighting a Cop City of their own sort where they live, because these things are cropping up all over the country now. Or, whatever fights may come as capital continues to expand the forces of policing and put down resistance of any kind. There's lessons there from across the movement I hope people can learn a lot from.
Yeah, 100%. There's a multiplicity of lessons here, and what struck me about the Cop City movement, the name in particular, right? It's discussed a little bit in the book that before Cop City, of course, there was the struggle against the building of Cop Academy in Chicago, and the No Cop Academy movement. The slogan there, the name there, sort of came out of a recognition that you cannot allow the bourgeoisie, you cannot allow corporate media to set the terms, to frame the discussion of this thing. You have to immediately call it out for what it is. Whence the name of Cop City for what's officially called the what is it called again? The Atlanta Police Training Center,
the Atlanta Public Safety Training.
Of course, it's public safety. Of course, that's what they always call it. Even though, of course, it's Alec Karakatsanis. We talked about him on the show before. He talks about this as like climate science denial, right? It's on that level to suggest people that policing, that prisons make us safe. They only spend 4% of their time on what they themselves label violent crime, and of course, crime statistics are self-reported by police. They don't include all the brutalization and the burglary that police themselves do. And
Lenore, as someone who lives on the border of unincorporated DeKalb, I can tell you there's this crazy gang that goes up and down my street every night, and they flash lights and stuff. So someone should do something about those. That would be the Atlanta Police Department.
Yeah, I've seen the big SUVs and 100%. And now they have a shiny new racetrack to practice bowling people down with those giant SUVs. Their horses have new stables. I don't know why police horses even exist in 2025, but these roving bands of violent actors in our community with total impunity rolling up and down Jacob's neighborhood.
Yes,
and so it's universal in a lot of ways. Like Lenore was saying, you have that Cop Academy, you have these cop cities popping up. But it is also an Atlanta-specific story, which is why I'm glad that you're getting to work on compiling this, and you have so many Atlanta people and Georgia people writing this and contributing to this. Not that we don't love the comrades who come from out of town. That's also incredibly constructive and helpful. We of course reject that outside agitator narrative because capital is the greatest outside agitator. But
they have no borders. Yes,
right. But it is an Atlanta narrative, and I'm kind of curious. You talk about the Atlanta way in this book, and you talk about the history of Atlanta. There's a great section in here that says Black Atlantans were told that we, quote, saved democracy or American democracy after the election cycles of 2020 and 2022. And that earned us a proposed police terror complex in a Black community made possible by the Black misleadership class, end quote.
Democracy for whom? That's always the operative question.
So I'm curious the Atlanta specific side of things and how this ties into local culture, local politics. I was wondering if you could maybe speak to that some.
Totally. I think this comes up in two very clear ways across the book and in our grounding as a movement over these years. One being the site itself. So you live out in unincorporated DeKalb, familiar with this what it was once one of the largest urban forests of North America, portions of which had been torn down already and repurposed for the Atlanta prison farm. So there's this place where after Reconstruction, after the fall of slavery, and after the 14th Amendment and the repurposing of the prison apparatus to just continue slavery in a new form, these convict leasing systems, the systems by which folks were being thrown into the prison farm for very trumped up charges by racist police forces and forced to toil, to make their own food, to raise livestock, to give sometimes services to the city, all the way up until, in the 1900s. I think it was a uniquely Southern thing that happened. So on top of that site where slavery was so concretely continued over a period of, over hundreds of years, is now where Cop City, where these police are being trained in how to now round up the newest generations of runaway slaves and make sure that they are fed back into the prison industrial complex in a state where it is outlawed by the Department of Corrections to pay incarcerated people for their labor. So snatching folks out of the streets of our communities so that they can go work for corporations, work for the state, making zero money, actually zero money. One of the few states in the country where that practice is still in place. As well, you mentioned the Atlanta Way, which kind of is seen as emerging in, the early 1900s, where there were like race riots happening really race massacres happening in Atlanta, especially in the 1906. These two dueling newspaper outlets churning up all of this paranoia in the white populace that, blacks are gonna, bring crime and steal from you and harm your family, culminating in this deluge of white mob violence in the city of Atlanta, the deaths of dozens of Black people, and the capitalist class of Atlanta, the largely white, business owning power structure in Atlanta, coming to the Black leaders of the community, the clergy, the Black business owners, folks of power among the Black community, saying like, okay, we have to figure out together how to put this down. It's not a matter of actually bringing peace in the form of justice, of resolving these tensions forever, but like we saw with Keisha Lance Bottoms, former mayor of Atlanta, and Killer Mike, rapper from Atlanta, during the uprising, telling everyone, go home. Everybody go home.
Killer Mike wearing a shirt that said "Kill Your Masters" on it. I remember it so well.
Crying about how his family was police officers, not to start beef with Killer Mike again, but this moment of like telling everybody to pipe down, quiet down, rather than end racism. Right. And so this power structure that's continued ever since, where the moneyed interests of Atlanta and the forces that you would associate in the South with the civil rights movement, the clergy, prominent leaders on these HBCU campuses, bringing them into the fold to pretty much over and over and over again crush dissent and crush dissent and manufacture consent for a very corrupt status quo. And so we've seen that played out with Cop City, where numerous Black clergy were trotted out in defense of this facility, numerous civil rights icons who were mobilized to defend this facility, and just really heinous ways in which like Black faces were put in high places, were like mobilized in service of something that's deeply harmful to our community still.
Mm-hmm. I remember, and it backfired on them. It did not work. But in the middle of all of this, in the middle of the construction, this is probably 2023, Angela Davis visited the city, and the city of Atlanta tried to give her like a big award or whatever, which of course she pretty quickly was like, through that big, they weren't going to trick Angela.
You can have this back now. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a little bit that was a little bit stupid on their part. Like, come on, that's a big try. But like they were even on that type of shit. Like it was really, I mean, and genuinely quite something, the level of like corruption they were working with. And also the way that they were uniting these forces. Originally it was Keisha Lance Bottoms, I believe, was the original mayor this was proposed under, than Andre Dickens, with the forces of capital that's represented really in things like the Atlanta Police Foundation, which this book gets into. And it's interesting. You mentioned those newspapers. Those newspapers are, I joke like, well, I hope they're, impartial now. Literally owned by Cox Enterprises now, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. This book talks about it, which the CEO sits on the board of the Atlanta Police Foundation, if I'm not
Ray has
if I'm not
raised
mistaken.
over $10 million for the Atlanta Police Foundation, who, by the way, for listeners who are, for first time learning about Cop City, it is not even owned by the city of Atlanta. It's owned by a private nonprofit organization, the Atlanta Police Foundation, that raises majority of its money from corporate like donors and like the philanthropic arms of these corporations like Coca-Cola, and Delta and things like that. And so it's not even accountable to the public, really. It's built on land that's outside of the city, but owned by the city so that they could skirt all these democratic processes for deciding whether or not it should have even happened in the first place. And it's owned by this entity that's not even a governmental entity. It's just it's pretty much just a bunch of rich people's private army. And so, yeah, one of the biggest donors for it is, the CEO of Cox Enterprises, who owns the paper of record for the state of Georgia. And so one of the things you talk about in the book is having to push back against the pro-police propaganda, the propaganda that is like the foundational to the journalism coming out about the facility, because of the interests of the rich that own the newspaper and the rich at the board, sitting around the boardroom of the police foundation to make sure that they, protect each other. And so, as a necessity, things like the Atlanta Community Press Collective emerging and Mainline ATL, where the people have done their own journalism, learned the skills of, archival research and filing open records requests to make sure the public is armed with the knowledge that they need to just live in reality, but then also to push back and organize effectively against.
And one thing that you have in this book is an essay from the Atlanta Community Press Collective and other people who have helped shape this narrative, which again is why people need to read the book for sure. We certainly have no time to go into every detail of all that, but it is really it's really remarkable the way that people have pushed back on that. And I mean, even the framing itself, calling it Cop City, winning honestly that like linguistic battle has been very effective in a way that like I'm sure Andre Dickens hates that everybody calls it Cop City. Probably I've seen people that support it call it Cop City. You know what I mean?
Right.
And even the framing around, until this, I'd never heard anyone refer to it as the Weelaunee Forest until this struggle.
Yeah, and I wish that's something I didn't get to reflect on for my own personal journey a lot in the book, but it's like a thread that runs through some of the other accounts. But like, I didn't consider myself an environmentalist when I got into this trouble. Oh yeah, climate change is bad and sustainability is good in just like a general way, but like through the process of like first coming at it from the position of like opposing the police militarization, but through that process, learning about the history of the forest and the indigenous culture of the folks that were pushed out of this land, learning about the ecology, learning about the way that other activists were engaging, it like building a relationship with the forest during their land occupations. I really developed a strong affinity with, the forest itself, and also just like the importance of protecting the environment, like really seeing all of us as like animals that like we need the forest to live and breathe. And so I think that's a powerful thing about the struggle that I hope the book conveys, and I hope other people are able to find in their own struggles of like how to find those intersections with other movements. So like, how do we tie in environmental injustice when we're talking about them shaving off the top of a mountain in Kentucky for mountaintop removal mining and building a prison on top of it. Right. The intersection of these different kinds of struggles, but bringing in folks who are environmentalists into the struggle against police militarization and vice versa, was something that I think made the movement as vibrant as it has been.
Yes, and indeed there is a powerful diversity at play here. Not only of tactics but of people carrying them out. It's the decentralized movement has no single unifying political framework. It includes abolitionists, anarchists, communists, liberals, libertarians, environmentalists, black radicals, neighborhood associations, faith congregations, voting and civil rights activists, indigenous and anti-settler colonialism organizers, disability justice advocates, and many more. It lies, Mariah, you're absolutely right, at the nexus of so many struggles, and the reverberating effects of the building of this cop city are impossible not to see if you're an organizer in the Atlanta area. Of course, it's mentioned the flooding that has taken place, that has gotten worse as a result of the clearing of all this forest land. Of course, we saw this in just this past hurricane season, just how badly particular parts of southern Atlanta got hit. There's that, and there's also the building of Cop City itself. Indeed, once you've seen the struggles on the ground and the complete lack of initiative from the city to address them, you see the motive for what it is, which is from this first essay here by Micah Herskin. Put simply, Cop City is the Atlanta ruling class's solution to a set of crises produced by decades of organized abandonment in this city. And I love that phrase, organized abandonment. It sums it up so well. Because, and they go on to outline the motives here, right? It's investing in police capacity on the heels of the 2020 uprisings. It's refurbishing the image of Atlanta. It's an encroachment on publicly owned land. It's essentially bringing the frontier home and privatizing what little left there is that hasn't already been privatized.
You nailed it.
Yeah, no doubt. I think also, thinking about other struggles around the country. I remember the first time for me, and it's also partially just shows, when I was coming politically conscious, when I first saw like an environmental struggle that also carried over to like this political struggle. I think of something like Standing Rock or something like that, or these struggles against these pipelines. And it's interesting because I think a number of these activists, especially indigenous activists that did come to Atlanta for this, did a lot of them cut their teeth at Standing Rock or struggling against pipelines that violated the United States government's treaties with indigenous nations. I remember in the book talks about this rally. There was a rally that started at the King Center that marched to the Atlanta Police Foundation. I got in a conversation with a man who was a member of an indigenous coalition who came from further north. He would say correctly came back because his family actually was from Georgia and spent a whole lot more time there than my family has spent in the Southeast, if you want to count it up cumulatively. And somebody asked him, and it was kind of an ignorant question, but the person was asking, they said, you're talking about, this land and who has the right to it. They were like, so what, you want to like kick all of us off? And he was like, no, that's y'all's thing. And I thought that was so funny.
Right. The idea of like communal stewardship of the land not belonging to anyone being such a foreign concept that we then frame it in our own experience of like dispossession, of isolation and exclusion.
No, 100%. And I think it's interesting though, but there was some experience of that and this is something that I didn't have any direct experience of in person, but there were encampments that for some time sprung up on the land. And the book talks about the experience of those in a way that I think is really interesting and whatnot. But it ties into what Lenore was saying is there was like sort of a bunch of differences of a bunch of different types of people that were engaging in different ways. I was wondering if you'd maybe speak to a little more of that, how that was both could be strengths or weaknesses of the movement. And of course, people have to draw their own conclusions. And this is also a movement that's ongoing. But if you could talk a little bit about the kind of diversity of tactics at play and what was unique about that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think early on when the plans for the facility were first announced, base building was a huge, and like door knocking, going out and talking to community was a huge part of the part of the campaign, culminating, early on with a 21 hours of public comment virtually online during the early pandemic. And when that failed, when they still pushed through the facility anyway, land occupation became one of the central tactics. And to this day, widely considered one of the most effective tactics the movement has used for slowing down the facility, because they couldn't build it if people were camping on it. So they had raves, they had parties, people were living out there. People built a whole community out in this forest as a way to fend off the bulldozers and the excavators and the machines of destruction that were brought in to build Cop City. And so, from there was a lot of different kind of forms of cultural organizing to bring folks in through things like open mics, through plant swaps, through food distribution, things like that. There were people that then started to report on it from our perspective and get the real facts out there about what was going on in the movement and in City Hall. So kind of pulling back the veil for normal people who didn't realize the way these things worked behind, closed doors with the
Yeah,
way
I
this.
think the land occupations are when people first started to really notice things too. At least
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me.
yeah, for
I
sure.
first heard about it from actually friend of the show and friendly podcast, the Trillbilly Workers Party, Aaron Thorpe, and
Oh yeah.
those guys talking about that. They were like the first time I heard about it, and maybe a few months after it started, and they were talking about, have you heard about these guys that are just like out there in the woods, right? But but then it's interesting how that turns into a broader thing, and also and how more people are able to engage in their own specific types of ways.
Yeah, I mean, one of the movement's strengths, I think, is like it was a very much like a get in where you fit in kind of movement, where
Sure.
everyone like feels very invited to just contribute what strengths they have, what gifts they have, what their interests are, but also based on their own unique political analysis of the moment. And so, while the diversity of tactics it was something that was deeply inspiring, I hope people take away from the book. There are pros and cons to decentralization that I hope people also use the book to evaluate. There's times where there are conflicting tactics, where if you're not coming from a shared political analysis, there are different ways where the tactics you use are going to get in each other's way.
Mhm.
There's ways in which folks are going to step on each other's toes, or ultimately there's going to lack like a singular focus of vision where we can all make sure we're leading towards the same result that we desire. And so I think as well, reflecting on the ways that there's these pockets over here and pockets over there of people really all taking bites out of this elephant in order to bring it to its knees. And it did, it has slowed down the development of the city a great deal, but
By like
also
2 years, yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. And so a reflection of mine of just like what is, the importance of organization as like a tool for maintaining momentum past a singular campaign. And so the diversity of tactics, like any like I think is the power that we have seen in this movement. I hope that people read the book and think to themselves and evaluate like, the power of centralization, decentralization, the power of organization, the lack thereof. Because as we enter a new period where the first phase of the facility has largely been built, there's several more to that are proposed, and so we'll see what shape the fight takes now. Mostly pivoting towards how we stop these facilities from being built in other communities, but taking those lessons of like how does decentralization also hinder the movement in some ways, how could other forms of organization benefit us in the longer term, and things like that. But I think those lessons are all for the reader to take away from reading and evaluating the book for themselves.
Well, certainly, certainly.
I was just going to say the great Palestinian author Hassan Kanafani said, "Imperialism has laid its body all over the world. Wherever you strike it, you damage it, and you serve the world revolution." I mean, that's very poetic and exciting, but it's true. And this is a bit of a smaller scale, though we can talk about how it ties into imperialism and honestly Palestine more specifically. But this kind of way of like, yes, if you are actively stopping a bulldozer or making people know what's going on, you are stopping this thing. If you are showing up at City Hall and causing problems, you're doing this. If you are a student who is giving Andre Dickens problems when he tries to go to Morehouse and basically win over the student body and talk to them like they're idiots and end up looking like the idiot, you are also serving this project. So it's interesting. And I think also with all these disparate forces, and yes, all these complications emerge, I think a book like this is super meaningful because it's self-consciously not coming from one perspective, but showing you a variety of perspectives and showing where they mesh and maybe where they don't, but not in a way that I think, at least reading it, that is any way, reflecting negatively on anyone, but instead is just kind of showing the kind of, we'll say the tapestry of the movement. And it's kind of a work of organizing in of itself of kind of how these things mesh. And of course, everyone's going to, draw their own conclusions about what makes the most sense and what doesn't. I don't think I'm certainly not qualified to say what the right answer is, but I think if it might be useful to say, well, here is where these things actually are working together. Here's where the referendum actually was helping the
Mm-hmm.
more illegal side of the movement. Here's where the more dangerous side of the movement actually forced some of these democratic concessions. Not that they ever meant it. We can talk about that in a second. But here's where the environmental side for you get what I'm saying. It's an
Yeah,
interesting
yeah.
how these things mesh that when you're just kind of in the heat of the moment, it can feel like, oh, well, they're doing that thing over there. And it's actually, we should be, more gracious to each other as well, because of course the state and the forces of capital want us to be at each other's throat.
Right. They're not
And,
certainly not going to give us any grace.
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. You know, and yeah, all the more reason to have it for each other. And certainly the the diversity of tactics and the sheer breadth of the coalition against Cop City has its, as we all were saying, it has its advantages. You know, it catches the ruling class off guard at critical moments that can be capitalized on and sort of pull back the curtain. Right. There's a bit in the book that I really like, that where y'all discuss that, like when Dickens goes to Morehouse to pitch this thing, what really catches him off guard and gets him angry is when people call him a sellout, right? You know, when somebody directly attacks the legitimacy of these people at the helm, that throws them off. I remember as well I believe it was during the June 2023 public comment session on this whole thing. Was it Andre Dickens's daughter? Do you recall, Jacob, who like got up and like tried to take everybody to task for calling him a bozo?
I don't remember the specifics of that.
I don't remember this, but I love it. Yeah.
It's burned into my memory. But
If
and
we
that's
can
the thing.
find like a video of it, I'll link it in the show
Okay,
notes.
yeah,
We'll
cool,
see.
cool.
It was fascinating to watch unfold because everybody laughed that down. But that's the thing. Like, and we discussed it a little bit way back in our Vincent Bevins episode. You know, the decentralization piece is useful for reverberating the message, for spreading the struggle across a multiplicity of communities, across a much wider breadth of the populace than ordinarily you might get. And the next step, it would seem, is to unify it a little bit, and to push on specific cracks that have formed. And I wonder where that was successful and where that could have been improved.
Yeah, I mean, I think one place that people really unified around was just like refocusing the attention of the public on the violence of the state in moments where questions of tactics, and when things happen like motorcycles getting burned or excavators having their gas tanks filled with sugar or whatever it may be happen, refocusing the fact on a living person was killed by the police in this forest so that they could build this facility. That is violence. It is violent to rip people away from their families, to imprison them. The highest rates in American history. Like that is violence. And so even for groups that might not agree with everything, might even find these tactics harmful, but know that the state is looking for cracks in our coalition to pry us apart so that they can win, having that principle unity around defending one another, standing strong together no matter what, including, for folks that were involved in the referendum campaign to try to get the question of whether Cop City should be built on the ballot for a popular vote in the city of Atlanta. And there's a lot of folks that disagreed with that because it's electoralist, it's, pipe dream. They're never going to allow us to vote on this because democracy doesn't exist under capitalism. And in the event, I'll let us vote on it. But standing in principled support of them, of like, okay, recognizing the value of base building efforts, trying to keep our differences in principled struggle together as a community, as a family. We'll figure this out behind the scenes,
right?
And together strong, in the face of forces that are salivating at the idea of tension between us. But yeah, ultimately, any winning movement is going to require a coalition. So while ultimately, yes, you do want it to eventually unify into something, folks joining organizations, folks, taking the next step once a campaign is over or the momentum has waned, to find some sort of movement home or some sort of container for continue to fight against those forces. The reality is that even for folks in organization, we will always have to be in coalition with broader groups at us, folks that don't always agree. So something I hope that people take away from the book as well is just sort of like a snapshot of what a coalition could look like for like almost like a fever dream of like what you might go up against when you are trying to win on a really big scale. Like once you really get in the trenches and once you have a real shot of winning, it's probably going to be because you have a group of bunch of random people from across the spectrum that are all marching together, towards a common goal. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely. And I think it's the more mass a mass movement is, the more it is like that, right? And the
yeah,
more
yeah,
you have people that are no matter what their ideology are, they're not necessarily in organization, or they haven't necessarily done this before. And I think a thing the Cop City movement struggled and struggles with is often being like an activist type movement. That's not unique to the Cop City movement. That is a lot of
mhm,
movements in times where
yeah,
revolutionary fervor is not high. 2020 was a really exciting and moving time that brought millions of people to the streets, but also scared a lot of people when that did see the repression. They did see what the city of Atlanta was willing to do, and other places.
mhm,
Talking about agitating directly against the police, directly against a militarized
mhm,
facility, you're talking to someone who has to make those decisions about what they're able to do, and what level they're able to engage. For some people, that is a signature on a piece of paper, or that is sharing a petition. And I think things like the referendum um, also show the masses of people, right? The undemocratic nature of the state, right? If you win, awesome, that's a
yes,
win for people power. If you
well,
fail, if it's struck down, rather, that shows, okay, well, this is the nature of the state. That is really what organizers, activists, anti-capitalists should have in mind. Of okay, let's turn every defeat into a victory by showing, at least from an understanding perspective, like, hey, this is where this is undemocratic,
Yeah,
because people.
it's the same logic as running in bourgeois elections, right? Because there are still people who consider bourgeois democracy to be legitimate, and so you have to be in that arena too,
yeah,
getting your politics in front of them.
completely. Yeah, I definitely learned a lot about how to build a mass movement through this experience. Through things like the referendum, seeing of like meeting people where they're at, as an opportunity to create an opportunity to talk to people about these issues by trying to get their signature on a piece of paper, just calling into question whether this facility should be built or not. And the way that that then pulled back the curtain for folks to see that, oh, yeah, the democracy does not exist right now because they didn't, even though we gathered 116,000 signatures to get this thing on the ballot, they still, fought us in court on it. These same
Absolutely.
Democrats that were trying to get us to come out and vote for Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff in 2020 and whatnot, 2021. And but as well, seeing so many people who through that process were brought over to the side of the more radical folks that saw like the police as the problem, as
Mhm.
capitalism as the problem, through that experience of trying and failing. Same thing with the environmentalists who we're always really skeptical of these like kids having raves in the forest. What is that about? To try to
Mhm.
stop the police? Are the police good? But over the course of seeing how much they were fought, even if they tried to use the correct channels, even if they were just trying to protect the children of Southwest Atlanta that are suffering from higher rates of asthma because of the deforestation already, them actually joining the side of the more radical folks. So like, okay, maybe this stuff doesn't work. Maybe that we do have to like as a part of any mass movement, eventually have to confront police power. If you are fighting for environmental justice, if you're fighting for queer rights, you're fighting for disability justice, you're fighting for housing, whatever your struggle is, if it is a strong enough fight for it, you will eventually have to confront the police. And so I think that was a really, really big lesson that people took away from it as the struggle took on a mass character in a way that we can use struggle as like a classroom for people to realize like if you might maybe only feel safe enough to sign a petition right now, but through that process come to see that like somebody gonna have to stand toe to toe with some folks with some SWAT shields and whatnot at
Right.
some point in time if everybody gonna get free. Like it was a really, really big learning experience for a lot of people involved, for sure.
And I'll say, while there's certainly, the construction happened, the camps were cleared quite
Yeah.
violently, and you talk about the murder of Tortuguita and share their own words in this book in a very beautiful way that I don't want to speak for. I think people should go and read it themselves and engage with that directly. There were moments that were very tense where there was like, I mean, I remember we referred to it at City Hall. They really were wanting to stop public comment at a certain point, and this was in the 2023, and people were like, well, y'all aren't leaving this room, like straight up. And then they realized like, yeah, no, we're actually gonna have to sit here and wait this out and listen. I mean, I remember being in there and them trying to say, oh, no more people could come in, or water wasn't allowed in, or no more people were allowed up the stairs, and people were finding back ways up the stairs. And just all this different stuff was happening, and people were collaborating in very interesting and creative ways. I remember when there was the commentary happening at Morehouse. I wasn't inside. I'm not a Morehouse student, but I was outside doing some community support, like a sort of rally that sprung up almost kind of on the spot just to support. And there was all of a sudden, all of a sudden, like Michael Julian Bond comes up and tries to speak to the students, and he's like, "Well, give me the microphone," and they're just like, "No," because he wanted to
He ran
come.
away. That's what they're so used to. Of like, oh come on! I'm like, how do you do, fellow kids?
Right.
Like, come on, let me get on the megaphone. I'm just like you. Andre Dickens also getting pissed off about being called a sellout. He's so used to the Atlanta mayor. It's like, I'm just one of you guys. Like, what do you mean my opinion means nothing to you? And so, yeah, the movie was a real affront to that. But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
but I
no,
remember
these
what
are
you're talking about. Yeah.
these are students flexing their power directly, and like young people. I mean, at Emory University, then in a very different context, they set up an encampment, a proto encampment. More than a year before encampments on college campuses would become a thing that were in people's heads. That was
Yeah.
cleared violently, and I remember the next day, these students who had barely considered themselves activists just standing there talking to the press that had been ignoring them until they took this stand. I think Ryan,
Yeah.
too, just in reference to that, had a quick story about Michael Julian Bond. I know you were like,
Got some
you were
header-ass
neighbors with
three
him at
wanted
one
to
point,
share.
weren't you?
Oh
He's
my
a city
God.
councilman, by the way, for those who don't know, the Atlanta.
And the son of civil rights leader Julian
Yeah.
Bond. So
a son of a much better man than him.
Let me put it this way: how bad that these people are at coming across as the hey, fellow community members, I'm just like you. So I lived in an apartment complex in middle of downtown Atlanta. My neighbor comes out, sees me walking from my car, asks me, "Hey, do you have a ladder?" I'm like, "I live in the second story of an apartment. Why would I have a ladder?" "Oh, my cat's stuck up a tree." So, like, long story short, I climb like 20 feet up to get her cat, bring it back down. We have a nice conversation. Turns out she is a relative of Michael Julian Bond, an immediate family member, whose cat I had just rescued out of a tree. Mr. Bond shows up, looks at me, says, "Hey, I'm Michael Julian Bond. Here's my card." Shakes my hand, and then stopped wanting to talk to me. No, thank you. No, like, "Oh, I'm so glad you got my family member's cat out of a tree. That's so great. I love that you did
here's
that."
my
Nope.
card. Oh God.
Wow.
So gross.
It's
No, I still
robotic,
have his
yeah.
card. I really wanted to bring it up during that public comment that Jacob was just talking about, but I also didn't want to get accused of threatening the honorable councilman's life.
The
Yeah.
honorable.
He also at that same comment said MLK would have supported Cop City, which was super cool.
That's some of the most disgusting stuff in here, to read these people invoking the names of people who fought segregation, who fought against the various systems of white supremacy that exist throughout our country.
Yeah.
What was the like text alert that went out that was like, oh, like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor can't vote, but you can? That's the most grotesque thing I've seen in a long time. Like
Period.
to
Yeah.
invoke these dead people's names to get you to go to the polls for a political formation that is perpetuating the very system that killed them.
Yeah, who do you think built Minneapolis has been like a Democrat controlled city for a minute? Who do you think built the cages that George Floyd had been in and out of to get his criminal record? Like who do you think funded the 1099 program to get all these military weapons in our communities of a kind that now they're shooting down people's doors and killing people like Breonna Taylor? The Democrats, like all of them, we're always locked up on these things, bro. So yeah, no, it's crazy. It's crazy the way that they have mobilized the memory of folks who have fought imperialism or who have just been caught in the crossfire of these horrible systems in order to try to just shore up what is an eroding edifice that they stand upon.
Yeah, and then you fast forward to just this past year, the Warnock and Ossoff, who saved democracy, quote unquote, right? They vote for the Lake and Riley Act, which empowers ICE to detain to detain so many more people.
Exactly. Same Warnock that was never commented on the fact that a person was, murdered by the police in,
Yep.
like, in his jurisdiction. Never even weighed in on like the referendum, whether or not people should still have a democracy in the city of Atlanta by being able to vote on whether they wanted this in their backyard. So
Yeah.
No
Talks to
doubt.
God, by the way.
Um, we referenced Kanafani earlier and talking about imperialism. I wanted to ask, what's the relationship between the Atlanta police and world imperialism? More specifically, we're thinking right now about Israel. I mean, that's all on our minds right now as Gaza is being decimated at a scale that we've really never seen. As we speak, the book draws connections both with the Gilly program, which you can speak to, and also the Urban Warfare Training Center, which is referred to as Mini Gaza, which is a similar facility in Israel. I wondered if you could speak to that and what this struggle's connection to, broader world imperialism is as well. Because, you strike one place, you strike it all as well.
yeah, so I mean, Georgia State University houses the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange Program, whereby police officers in Atlanta in the state of Georgia are sent over to Israel to learn from them, tactics to, keep the community in constant fear, to terrorize people, and they bring them back and they use them, and they're using them on the streets of Atlanta right now.
Yeah.
And so if you can imagine that, and if you can imagine a facility where people from all over the state and all over the country are coming to train in some of the tactics that the Atlanta Police Foundation or the Atlanta Police Department are using, and they learned over where genocide is happening, you're seeing how this facility can be used to like export tactics, pretty much just like bring home the tactics of terrorism that we have funded abroad in places like Israel. And so that's one way that we kind of actively participate, even here, just like in the city of Atlanta, in shoring up, reifying, affirming these genocidal regimes in other places, and also then bring it back here so that in places like Ferguson, in places like Minneapolis, we get the same treatment as they are experiencing in places like the West Bank right now.
hmm And I can say how much they value that partnership because I've seen firsthand here in Atlanta, the entire APD having to be out in force to protect the Israeli consulate from, Arab grandmothers during Ramadan, basically, on like a
Yeah,
protest. There's
yeah.
just like 20 people out there with Palestinian flags. Or one time we had a children's march that was just a very small group of children walking around. I mean, you've got these guys out here just in force or whatever. So, that you can tell it's a sore spot. I don't think anyone can drive around, at least not right now, Vine City in Atlanta without saying there's these propaganda posters. I'm not sure who puts them up, but they're really cool. It says APD, KKK, IDF. They're all the same. And it has all three of them there looking the same. And it literally, that's not just a slogan. It does sound good. It sounds good in a chant, but it's also literally true for those reasons you say. And we are mirroring the tactics that were used over there. And it's like worth noting that if imperialism can get away with that over there, if your money can get away with that over there, they're seeing how far you're willing to go, how much you're willing to give up. And,
Yeah.
not that you shouldn't have solidarity if it doesn't affect you, but you really, it does hit close to home, and it will hit close to home, and it is actively. And also for the rest of the United States, those of you who don't have a cop city in your town, potentially coming to a city near you. So you really, we need to be ready for that.
Potentially coming to 69 cities near you. It's all over.
And it is spreading around, and the first phase of it is done here. So, Mariah, I'm curious what, and we're not asking you to have a crystal ball, but where does and should the movement go from here? What do we do now that, tragedy that it is, so much of Weelaunee Forest has been destroyed, that the referendum seems to be on hold, that the construction is done. What's the next step? What do activists do? Because what we're not here to do is to do a in memoriam on the anti-Cobb City movement. It is alive, it is well, and that land will be reforested one way or another one of these days. We all believe that. Where do we go next?
So two important prongs of the movement now are the defense of the political prisoners that have been persecuted by the state in order to demonize this movement and, crush dissent. So there's 61 people who've been charged with RICO. Within that group, there are a number who've been charged with domestic terrorism. for things as simple as attending a music festival in the forest, for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for flyering in the wrong neighborhood. And so we have to continue to offer these people support so that we build the strength and confidence of the working class to struggle, knowing that people have their back, even when the state meets them with repression. And so those folks' cases are working their way through court right now. There's been a number of court support rallies. There's some fundraising for their legal defense and things like that. I will, if there's any sort of way I could like link that.
Please, it'll be in the show notes below. Yeah, check the show notes below. We're gonna have all kinds of information on how you can get directly involved and help out as well.
Awesome. The second thing I'll say is, stopping Cop Nation. How do we stop these facilities in Baltimore and St. Louis and Charlotte and other places? And so activists across geographies are in touch about, what are some of the shared contractors for projects like these? How can we continue to put pressure on them so that their bottom line is threatened and they pull out of the projects, as did some of them in Atlanta, because they recognize they're not going to profit off of the terrorization of our communities. What sorts of ways can we engage in similar hijinks, things like, disrupting police hiring fairs and stuff like that in these other communities, so that these facilities don't move forward. And then continuing to link fights like these to the fight for environmental justice, fight against climate change. And so educating more and more people about the importance of places like the Weelaunee Forest, so that people like myself, who didn't start out with a deep kinship with nature, can understand why that is our fight too, as we fight capitalism, as we fight racial injustice and oppression. It is also linked to the fate of the earth. And so just continuing that work, and hopefully through that education, building a broad enough coalition to win in the future.
There is, I think, as well, what's critical to remind people as the movement ebbs and flows, of course, is that there are ebbs and flows. Of course, that first phase of Cop City that's open, that's essentially open now, the first of a planned several, they say. This one of the rallying slogans in this whole movement is Cop City will never be built. And the thing of it is, like, the state will forge on, and regardless of how many contractors you can get to pull out, which has happened, regardless of the delays, the state will continue to forge on, because that's what they do, because because the goal of a bourgeois state is to protect bourgeois property, and it can't be reformed into doing anything else. And the thing of it is, a movement has to evolve when the state escalates, as always it will. And I think a really illustrative extract from the book is the part 3, Viva Viva Tortuguita, about Tortuguita and their role in the struggle, their occupation of the forest, ultimately their death at the hands of, their killing at the hands of the APD. Of course, they were shot 57 times by Atlanta police while they were sitting on the ground with their hands raised. And what I see in particular their diary is how even an extremely peaceful person filled with love for nature, for their community, for their surroundings, can be consumed by incredible anger.
Yeah.
And I have a bit right here. Here we go. Being Ready to Die, from the day after Christmas 2021. It is radical and reckless and not very smart to be ready to die at any moment. It takes a lot of practice to have your shit together, and you don't need to have your shit together to be ready to die at any moment, for a cause or not. I have lived a life that I don't regret. I have had so much fun and been oh so lucky, blessed and unstressed for a lot of it. The stress is or has been kind of good for my development, at least for making me a little more ready to do whatever I need to do. To be ready to die is to affirm having a good life and no attachment. I do not know when I will die, and that does not bother me. Fuck the police and the government and all those damn fools that uphold these systems that fuck us all over and destroy the planet. Gotta get those gains so you can knock the fucking cops out if they try to grab you. Burn down the prisons and kill all the prison guards and their backers and owners and stockholders. And, of course, a very bad faith reading of this, indeed the reading that, the newspapers of record went with, is that this person, had a propensity of was fantasizing about violence. And I would push back on that. I would argue that actually, it's very, very difficult to look at what's going on, to look at the sheer brutality being visited on working people, the continued dispossession and impoverishment of working class communities. It's very difficult to look at that and not have thoughts like these, you know? And the fact of being a peaceful person by nature and still having this incredible anger in one's heart is something that I think is worth following through on and exploring in community with people, because that's how you get drawn into a movement like this, right?
Yeah.
Like it's this anger is much more common than people realize or want to discuss, and to constantly as difficult as it is to be out in the streets doing this stuff, like to constantly repress it instead of speaking out, instead of showing out, instead of channeling into action, like to keep that down wears on one constantly. And I promise, in the long run, it is easier to get it out in a community of people.
Thank you so much for saying that. That is so absolutely true. Because I think we ended up seeing that expression of all of that anger instead in like investment in community. Like there's so many different directions that you could see that channeled into. We see so many people take on a lot of self-destructive tendencies and things like that when they just have this alienation inside that they don't know what to do with, and instead investing that into creating a community, to living in harmony with nature and things like that. I was something that we'll all forever admire about Tortuguita, and I'm so appreciative that you raised as like a lesson from this, of like that's where this energy has to go ultimately, is into organizing together, building together, being in community with others.
Absolutely.
It's exactly the sort of profound love that Che Guevara said that the revolutionary needs.
Absolutely. I don't think anyone would question Che Guevara or someone like George Jackson that they didn't have the dog in them, the fight in them. But both of them would reiterate constantly that a revolutionary is driven by love. Absolutely. Mariah, we really appreciate you coming on. Is there any other things that you want to share or put forward or plug here as we kind of come to a close?
I can't think of anything. I'll just send you the link to the fundraiser. But yeah, no, that's it. Thank you all so much.
Absolutely.
Thank
The
you.
book is No Cop City, No Cop World. Everyone absolutely needs to check it out. It'll be linked right at the top of this episode. And if you're going to read, there have been people who have emailed me that are like, "Oh, we went and read your episode on like Bill Clinton's book was so funny. I went and read it myself." If you're going to do that, you better go and buy like this actually good revolutionary literature. I know who you are. I appreciate that we were funny enough. You went and read like evangelical Christian books that we made fun of, then you got to go and read this and other revolutionary literature we bring on. It's absolutely important. Mariah, super appreciate you. Just at the very end here, I wanted to share two things. The first is just a reminder, in a couple weeks, our 100th episode is coming up. So anyone who is interested in dropping, having their comment read on the show, asking us a question, anything like that, feel free to email us at thesocialistshelf@gmail.com. Just wanted to throw that out there one more time. And just wanted to say, yeah, it's been awesome to get to do this. And one more time, buy the book, get the book. It's No Cop City, No Cop World. And to close, I just want to read a quick quote from Tortuguita. The abolitionist mission isn't done until every prison is empty, when there are no more cops, when the land has been given back. That's when it's over. So somebody asked, so y'all are at 100 episodes. How long are you going to go? Till it's over, y'all. We're going to make this happen.
Till it's over.
Till it's over.
As long as it takes.
Y'all have a good one. Peace.
Thank you for listening to Socialist Shelf Radio.